So we're going to show a video right now from Lightspeed, who's really solving another set of problems. And then we're going to roll into having Chris McMurray join us so we can dig into the new normals of what's going on inside the digital learning experience standards and all of that.
Young children spend 75% of their school day involved in listening activities and need to receive 90 to 100% of information via the spoken word to understand the full meaning. But there are numerous barriers standing in the way of that critical intelligibility, and unfortunately, they can't yet fill in the blanks when things are missed. In students' environments, distance, directionality, and ambient noise all play a role. Speech gets quieter over distance, dropping in volume significantly as it makes its way toward the back of the room. Further, when teachers face away from their students, the sound level can be cut in half. Distracting ambient noise can also drown out speech, leaving students and teachers straining to effectively communicate. And simply increasing the volume of speech itself is often not enough. As loudness increases and teachers try to reach the entire room, students might be able to hear what's being said, but they may still struggle to understand it. For example, clarity is critical to the understanding of soft consonants, such as p, t, k, s, and more. The recent COVID-19 pandemic has added additional challenges to the listening environment, such as greater distance between students and teachers, masks and other facial coverings, and protective barriers on desks. With instructional audio, you can overcome these challenges. By leveraging a microphone with either a portable or installed speaker solution, you can ensure the teacher's voice achieves even coverage, regardless of distance, directionality, and ambient noise. And with an easy, tap-to-talk microphone, student voices are clearly heard by both their teachers and peers. Instructional audio provides a clear way to hear the human voice and a pathway to elevating the learning and understanding of students in the modern classroom. To learn more, contact Lightspeed today.
Okay, so I'm going to ask Melissa to introduce herself, Pontarelli from Lightspeed. Hi, Melissa. So just introduce yourself and tell people, and you can even put this in chat, how to get a hold of you, because the problem that you're solving is so important right now in classrooms where you still have to be 6 feet apart all the time. Like you can't hear, right? What
Yeah.
This is important.
Yeah, it's interesting. The last year, the conversation has very much changed, right? From the traditional classroom environment to what it's going to look like when you're on a Zoom and the audio, and how we can manage that and still allow for teacher flexibility, so that especially in the hybrid environment where you've got the Zoomers and the Roomers, those teachers can be agile and moving about the room and being away from a device. I know actually right as that video was playing, of course, my neighbor has his lawnmower out and it's on, and then suddenly I see the Amazon truck pull up, right? And I'm like, oh gosh, the dogs are going to be barking. They're going to unmute me. And so audio is, it's something that we've all experienced, especially as we've been at home with all the noise that's going on in the background. But it's been a really interesting journey having to change up the conversations and navigate what this now looks like and what this means. And so Lightspeed's been really flexible with that as well. And in terms of moving from an all classroom solution to how we can really change, making an impact and making sure that every syllable is heard in the environment of the hybrid classroom or in an all digital virtual environment as well. So happy to connect with any and all individuals that are interested in learning more. I will go ahead and put my contact information in the chat box for you all. Other than that, I really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks so much, Leilani.
Yeah. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for sponsoring. These are our other sponsors that you see on the screen right now. Achieve 3000 has been on and contributing, and ClassLink, and Scholastic Digital Solutions, and Codesters, awesome product. We're glad to have them with us. They're new to us, which we inspected their product. We're like, wow, this is really cool stuff. And Identity Automation, sort of charting the new ground in education, and also No Story. So thank you so much, Melissa. Proud of your work. I think if you weren't doing your work, most of Georgia, which is all doing simultaneous teaching, they'd be sort of having a real rough time. Teachers walk away from their machine and then the kids are on Zoom for the class. Can't hear anything. So thank you. Thank you for doing that. Okay, so we're going to move on next to this whole conversation about digital learning experience. And I have with us today Chris McMurray, and I'm going to be passing him the mouse so that he can walk you through what's happening. And we're going to go as quickly through everything as we can so we have time to talk about it, because we really want you engaged and talking about what's happening now in education. So, Chris.
Yep. Hi, can you hear me?
Handing you the mouse.
Okay, perfect. I have the mouse. Thanks. We'll hope that it works this time.
Yeah.
So thanks so much. I hope that everybody that's here right now was also listening into the conversation with Gavin about identity automation, and a couple of things came out of that I feel are a perfect segue to what I'm going to sort of breeze through and skip over the top of today. Number one is, if we're going to restructure in those ways, and we're going to start to talk about how the IT structure is designed, or the system is designed for everyone within that system, in order to maximize the humans, we really have to have a deep understanding of the building blocks, right? Of the things that we're going to use in order to build an experience. We have to understand what structures are going to be most effective for personalized learning, because that's the goal. And we also then have to have a model and some standards by which to guide us and to guide the work, and then to measure it. And so that's perfect, because that's exactly what I'm going to dive into today. And so again, my name is Chris McMurray. I'm an EduJedi with the Learning Counsel. And I've been in school systems, large and small, pushing the same type of work and the same types of conversations that we're engaged in today. And so I'm super happy to be here, and very pleased that you're all with us in this journey. So we're really going to start talking a little bit today about the dictionary, which is available for a download. If you haven't gotten it, definitely go get it. It's going to guide your work. If your IT and teaching and learning people aren't walking arm in arm, this is something to put between them and say, both of you take a look at this, because it's important that you both understand it. We're also going to talk about some standards for administrators and educators, and we're going to talk about a model for that learning design that really goes deeper than just digital literacy. Some of the other models that we see are designed a little bit differently, right? And they're not necessarily around, they're not student-centric. So we're going to go through that. Looks like Doug has put up the dictionary download there in the chat, so for sure go grab that. And we're going to keep going. We're going to jump in here. So
yeah, Chris, I'm waiting for make sure you took control of the remote.
Okay.
I think you have to go and click on something to show that you're clicking on it. Yeah, there you go.
There we go.
Yeah,
now I'm
good.
in.
Okay,
Good. It's working. The scroll wheel works. Fantastic. Yeah. So I'm gonna jump in with a description of some characteristics and a scale that was developed, and this is the beginning of the conversation about understanding the building blocks that we are going to use as we design experiences. And those experiences then are, if you're dovetailing with something like identity automation, right? This is the other side of that. This is the teaching and learning side. And so what you see in front of you, this is a scale of digital learning object characteristics. And this was designed back in 2015 by the Learning Council. And really what this does, I'm pleased that the word sophistication came up in the last conversation, because that's what this is about. This is about getting more sophisticated, understanding how more sophistication leads to more humanization. And that's really critical. So on the left-hand side, I'll describe these as we go. On the left-hand side, you see digital documents, and we all have seen these, right? This is a Google Doc, it's a Word doc. It's static, it doesn't do a whole lot, it doesn't interact with other systems, it doesn't necessarily interact with the end user or the learner. And as you design with those, you're also then at the top, you see two arrows, you're also requiring more teacher time, because those are generally teacher created. And so if we're moving toward a system that is designed around students and student experience that also then leverages the humanity of the teacher, to do the things that they do best and are very necessary, then we have to understand the scale. So we move up into single loop animations, and single loop animations are, for example, making a slide in a PowerPoint presentation do things. It spins or dissolves or creates some sort of a simple animation. Adds to the interest, doesn't really do a whole lot for the learner's ability to exercise agency. And so, but it is moving up the sophistication scale from a Word doc into video, which is then described sort of as a video that the teacher might, and you've seen a lot of these, right? The video of a conversation around biology that a teacher recorded, they put it up in the LMS, or they put it up in whatever the distribution model is for students to get to it. And it allows the student to pause or stop or rewind or fast forward, replay. And that's good, right? That's moving up the sophistication scale, because now the learner, the end user, can actually do something with it and interact with that content. And that also then takes the teacher off the hot seat, and allows them to go alongside some of the other learners while that resource is being used. I'm still fairly low on the scale, but we're moving up to things like collections, right? And so this would be like a digital collection of resources that you might search, right? It's a searchable collection around a content area. It might be world history, for example, and it might bring you paragraphs. It might bring you text, images, short videos. It might be sort of a collection of linked content that the instructor has curated for the students. And still, again, we're still on that more instructional planning time. And having been a teacher in the classroom and used those types of collections back in the day with things like Moodle and those types of early experiences, yeah, there was some planning time involved in that, and it wasn't bad. But I know that now there are resources that will do a lot of that heavy lifting for me, and that's fantastic. So right after collections, moving into feedback, there's sort of a tipping point, right? And we're moving from less automated to more automated resources or learning objects, and we leap into that feedback level. And the feedback level is critical in this regard, because this is the first time within the scale of those characteristics for learning objects that we actually see the learning object giving feedback to the learner and creating a feedback loop that might answer questions or might lead them in a certain direction based on input from the learner. And so if you think about these being Legos and dumping out the Legos onto the table and building something new, being a designer using the more sophisticated pieces means that you're going to make a cooler spaceship. And who's going to love the cooler spaceship? The end user is going to love it, and then they're going to use it. And so keep this in mind as we go through the next several steps, and as you start to consider, how does this apply to me in my own system, and how, if I'm an administrator, how do I support the educators in my system to design in this way? This is an important consideration when you're looking at resources. So coding is not the supreme coding digital courseware, zeros and ones types of things. This is actually very low level. When we talk about coding right there, that would be like a website, for example, or a WordPress site being created by a teacher, and then we move into this sort of magical level, which is really the highly designed digital courseware level. And this is where things like machine learning and a lot of the concepts around gaming come into play, and you create a whole world around a range of content areas that then the learner is immersed in and has facility and navigation control through. And that's where we start to see the greatest leverage for this type of technology. And it's important to understand that. So if you're designing, make sure you get that. And if your teachers haven't thought through that, it's time well spent to start thinking about and picking apart, what are you designing with and how sophisticated is it? So that's an important thing. So I'm gonna jump over to the next level or next layer on top of that, and this is really another scale that talks about learning objects and really describes them in terms of granularity. and aggregation. So in the previous one, we talked about the sophistication and what those learning objects can do in the design and in the ecosystem. This one really talks about those objects in terms of their connectivity and their granularity in relation to one another, essentially. So you see at the very top, there's sort of the concept level, and this is the most granular level. This would be a scrap of text, a paragraph, an excerpt from a textbook. It might be a digitized paragraph from a paper resource, but it doesn't do anything. Again, like similar to the digital document, it doesn't do anything, right? It's just there. It's fine, right? It's fine content, but again, you've got to jump through some hoops to get to use that in a very dynamic way. Moving up into contextualized forms of content, and that means that those are more curated around a single content or a concept or an idea, up into courses and ebooks, and these are essentially then amateur authorware types of things, right? And so that you can assemble an ebook. I could do it today, and most other people already have, and so that allows you then to create something that is portable. It can be linked to, it can be gone back and forth within, and it has some context in it, and it's collecting all of those things. It's still an amateur authorware learning object. Not bad, but not sophisticated. So moving up that scale, however, we leap into the professionally coded world. And this is where we start to see long form to short form types of applications being used. And these are much more powerful, right? And so using and leveraging the power of technology is what we've all been talking about for the last 2 days, right? And so at the very low end of that, the short form end is the applet or app. And this is similar to the concept. This is a discrete application that does one thing. It might be math facts. It doesn't connect over to ELA. It doesn't connect to a larger system that has more modules in it. It just does one thing, and it probably does it very well. But it's finite, and you go through a number of levels, and then you're done. Moving up into courses and courseware, and this is where we start to get into multiple modules, multiple content areas, something that is much more rich in terms of the experience, and much more capable of creating experience for a learner, into collection levels, which then start to use and leverage AR and AI, and we're starting to make predictions. We're starting to be sort of connected to what the learner's identity might be, and actually start to use those tools effectively. So this all shows up in a report that's available online, and you see a little thumbnail of it back up there. It's definitely worth taking a look at if you haven't already. But this is an important scale to understand as you layer it on top of the one that we just looked at. So we'll go into depth a little bit more. So we've seen this once before, and this is something that Lonnie flashed up while we were talking about identity automation and identity infused education. And what I want to highlight in this particular one is the stair-stepped graphic, right? Because what we started to see, and what the Learning Council started to see, was this feeling of being overwhelmed, and we've been talking about it for a long time, and people we're having trouble putting their finger on it, and I don't know how to describe it, but I feel like I'm losing my mind as a teacher, and I'm approaching burnout as an administrator. I'm not sure what's going on, but I don't like it, and so what happened is that the Learning Council took a look at that and started sort of dissecting some of the feedback that was given, and I keep going back to, there we go. And what was learned was that there was a digital load that existed, and it's sort of illustrated in that stair-step graphic. And what you see there is that by grade level, there are things within those grade levels, and the things change, and those are representative of learning objects. And that's a tiny subset of what we now see out in systems, changing by grade level, even by classroom in some instances, and that's nuts. And so think of yourself as the student and trying to navigate that, let alone being the teacher trying to navigate that. and you've got a mess, and it gets really muddy very, very quickly. And how do you move through that stuff? And so it was identified that the routing or logistics is the component that's missing, right? And we have all the software systems, but how do we help a learner and an educator move nimbly through that and use it so that they all can be most effective? And then also even identify ones that maybe aren't effective, because we have to start evaluating those resources for efficacy, and start streamlining the system, because we can't have 1,000 apps out there in our ClassLink dashboard, because it's just nuts. It's overwhelming. And so this is an important step, because this was the first time that somebody identified that digital load, and then started to think, okay, yeah, well, here's what's missing. What's missing is that logistics level. So keep that in the back of your mind as we move into this next section. And I'm going to go through some of the dictionary a little bit, and we're going to get to some definitions and some standards that are directly connected to what I just shared in those three graphics. So jumping into the dictionary is organized into categories, and I'll go through very briefly what those categories are, but I want to make sure that you understand sort of what's in them and how this is designed and organized. So the actions is really, the actions section or the category really talks about functions of the code that do things, right? This is discrete action without involvement from other processes. It's the unique thing that one application does, or the code is designed to do. Design really talks about the aesthetics or the dressing around the application or the learning object. What about navigation? What about interoperability? What about user onboarding? Things like options for accessibility, strategies for engagement, things like that. Those are all talked about in the design category. Controls talks about administrative capabilities, and this is critical when you're going to start to address learner identity and personalization, because you have to be able to control that resource within your ecosystem, and that section talks about that. Customization, very, very closely aligned to that. We've had some discussion around personalization today, and this is really speaks to functions that support decisions to match the needs of those learners, of the individual learners. And so that breaks out into individualization and personalization. And I want to make sure that we're clear around that understanding of those two topics, because individualization refers to decisions that educators make for the learners, and personalization refers to models where the learners have the options to decide what methods or materials will best suit their needs, and then move forward through their learning in that. And that's a distinction that needs to be clear. The instruction category is important, because here we're talking about learning objects having lesson giving qualities and understanding what those lesson giving qualities are. So for example, content delivery, tutoring, feedback, support, things like that, that are built into a learning object that you have to understand. Those are discussed in there. Mechanisms are really the digital structures that create a series of steps within a learning object or an application. So it's a series of actions that are built in a small system to work in sequences or loops, and we've seen those in some of the discrete applications. The seventh category is business model, which I can tend to jump up on a soapbox about, because this is something that is not really understood clearly from especially a teaching and learning aspect, but in the central office, unfortunately, we see a lot of folks who don't consider business model in the classroom sometimes as well. And this is an example of that is freemium, right? Free's not free. Free actually isn't free. Somebody's collecting data and they're sustaining the business by selling the data or something. And you have to understand that, because if you don't, you're likely to break something, and you're likely to put something into your ecosystem for teachers that is unwieldy and creates a poor experience, which doesn't help what Lonnie was just talking about, attrition. And you know what? We've got a responsibility. We've got standards for it, as a matter of fact, for creating those learning designs, for creating those experiences. So that's all in there. Business model, it's in there. Understand it. Hostile characteristics, very connected to that, right? These are characteristics in apps they're intentionally used to intrude upon the user, and we've seen them. It's the pop-up button that flashes, hey, upgrade to premium for $19.99, and then all of a sudden every fifth grader in a class clicks that, and then what happens? You need to understand, does the resource that you're speccing have hostile characteristics or not, and what are those? And then finally, the last one is basics and not so basics. This is terminology and ideas that are important to understand as you start to sift through those. So I'll share a few examples, and I'm only sharing a few that are fairly meaningful in understanding this, and then you can see the rest of them through the dictionary. So this one is spatial temporal reasoning, and I love this one because it has Gigi the penguin in it. And if anyone has ever met me at any of these events, or even perhaps listened to or participated in the online ones, I'm a huge Gigi fan. I'm a gigantic Gigi fan, and Gigi is probably one of the most popular penguins on the face of the planet. And Gigi teaches math without words, and Gigi is a great example of that spatial temporal reasoning. It's the intentional non-use of language to instruct, and this is good. This is something you have to understand, because this is leading toward greater sophistication in a resource, which causes the learning to be sticky, which is what we all want, and it raises engagement. And so understand what spatial temporal reasoning is, and do the resources that you're purporting to put into the classroom. Do that. Here's hostile characteristics again, right? This is intrusive characteristics built into a resource that can muddy the experience. For example, if you use a resource in your learning design that you think, oh yeah, this is great, my learners are going to do this and this and this and all these decisions, and then they'll go do these things and use this resource. If you didn't consider that resource is going to pop up a upgrade now button, then all of a sudden your learner is going to reach that and go left and get lost. And of course, then they've gone down the rabbit hole, and getting them back is going to be very difficult. So understand what those hostile characteristics are, and plan for that. Modal, this is really this is something that you want to understand as a learning designer using these tools and learning objects. The modal is a dialogue, right? This is something that different than a pop-up. It actually causes interaction with the learner and forces some decision making, right? And then it takes them down a path based on input. It really overlays the main app, and you can sort of see in that photograph, it's the thing that pops up and makes you choose as you move forward. So the next one actually is very important as well, although it's something that we don't really think much about. This is sort of how you organize information as a designer of education or of a learning experience, but also how the software application nests information and organizes and structures that. It's important because if the information is hard to find, it won't be used. And if you inadvertently put in something into your design that causes that confusion, again, usability goes out the door, and then you're redesigning, and we don't have time for that, right? But you can watch out for it, and you can understand this. So that's important. I'm going to leap over now to standards for administrators and teachers, and I know that there may be some conversation following this on the dictionary pieces that I just sort of skipped over the top of, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time for the standards. So standards for administrators is important, and having been a central office administrator and worked with very many through my years. This is something that is not clearly understood nor articulated within systems. And what we're talking about here is professional responsibilities at the administrator level, central office and building level, for selection and management of digital learning objects and systems. And that means that as the teaching and learning guy, I need to know about some IT things. I need to know about hostile characteristics. I need to know about business models. I need to know about mechanisms. All the things that go into that dictionary, I have a responsibility to know. And so as we sort of look through, here's only three examples of those, but for example, How are you weighing the actual cost of a resource? We've all done sort of traditional adoptions of curricular resources that may have had some embedded resources that were consumable, and then all of a sudden we didn't consider that in the budget. Similar, when you're using digital resources and learning objects, there may be some stuff that's hidden in there that you didn't even think about. Maybe you have to actually buy more than you thought in order for that resource to be effective for you. You have to understand licensing. You have to understand the legal language. You have to understand data ownership. As the teaching and learning guy, yes, you do need to understand what a DSA is, and you're going to need to pick through the DSA and understand it together with your compatriot on the IT side, because that's what your job is. Your responsibility is that, because you're that front line. You're preparing and putting resources into the ecosystem that you then are stamping with your name and approval. And you have a responsibility for that. The next example is progressively working toward individualization and personalization. I think Lonnie mentioned this before, and I'm going to say it again because it's critical. We should all be moving toward personalization explicitly and making plans to do so. If not, now is the time. You're behind the 8 ball if you're not already talking about how we're going to personalize learning in your school system and what that might look like and how you're going to move forward. But you do have a responsibility for that as an administrator, and also then increasing digital pathways, right? So we're talking about workflow, and we're talking about using logistics models, and luckily we have some of that for you. That's a responsibility. So I strongly encourage anybody who's participating, who's an administrator, central officer building, get this out and pull your people together and start talking about it. Standards for teachers are a layer, right? And this is all layered based on your perspective within the system. And so the teacher's version of this, of the professional responsibilities, is really for composition and systems, learning design, and student oversight. That's important to understand, that we're creating a difference between designing for learning versus designing for teaching. That's a distinction that needs to be talked about within your system, and because the action is different, right? If you're designing for the learner or for a learning experience, that's different than designing for a teaching experience. And then there's standards for students. I'm not going to go through examples at this point, but definitely look through there. So the standards, again, another layer. This is important because the standards for student talk about the learner's responsibility regarding user interface and the experience and the digital content, and advocating and exercising agency within the experience, and evaluating, using some critical thinking skills, and evaluating the efficacy of some of these resources as they make decisions within the personalized learning environment. And this is new, right? This is not, that doesn't come naturally. It is something that needs to be taught, and it's something that needs to be planfully taught. And so systems need to make sure that this is included in how they move forward with their learners. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the model. And so this is sort of in the progression of what we're discussing today. This is where we make a distinction between models that currently exist and have for some time, and what we're presenting as something that is much more learner-centric. And so at the very top of the graphic you see Addie's model, and Addie's is it's fine. It's probably 45 years old, and it's teacher-centric. So every one of those little gray boxes really does talk about what the teacher does. And in a culture or a system that is designing for teaching, maybe this works. And it has worked for some time, except in the content comment that we had in the last one. I think it was Anne that said normal really wasn't working for anyone before anyway, which is very true, which is why we're all talking about personalized learning, which is why we're all talking about letting technology help us to get there, because now, if ever, we have the opportunity and we have the ability to really, really, truly personalize. We have it. The technology exists. And for us to not seize that, I think is irresponsible. So this EduJedi model, however, that is directly beneath that, really starts to break that apart, and it breaks it up into something called workflow logistics design and discovery design. And so both of these, however, are how learners and educators navigate through through an experience, and then how learners begin to exercise student agency, which then helps to lead to learner identity, positive learner identity in the design. And so you'll see that for example, at the top, we're talking about analysis, and we're talking about organization and goals, and the problem being solved. Those are all identified by the teacher. Whereas down here in discovery design, we're talking about the teacher presenting things and the student creating the question, right? And we all know that higher level questioning leads to sticky learning and understanding. And so that's important, because guess what? That's built into the model. And so all you really have to do is begin to apply the model and make that real within your system. And we're automatically moving toward a more personalized experience. A quick note on this model: we're continuing to develop this. This is a result of a lot of work from some very proficient educators across the country, and who have added to the thinking around this. And we're going to keep keep massaging and tweaking this so that we all get to the golden truth, which is then the experience. So here's a couple of ways that the EduJedi model is different than the Addies. It really starts to address time, space, place, and pace, and those as the critical elements of sort of the cornerstones of a personalized learning experience that allow you to modulate and move through not only a physical environment but your learning environment. That's different. It really allows, I think I mentioned this before, it allows for goal setting that isn't restricted to course or class framework, right? It's goals that are much more personalized. It's goals that are set based on a learner's input and their plan, right, as they move forward. It talks about automated synchronicity between standards and pacing guides and teacher calendaring, and the parts of a lesson that are designated for live interaction versus auto calendared sort of cohort types of movements that will exist in the newer structure. And then it's rather, again, I mentioned this before in the discovery learning design. This is a problem posed by the learner, right? And it's questioning, it's higher level questioning, it's built into that, whereas that was not built into Addies. And it really then talks about this student discovery and autonomy, which is student agency, defined in knowledge domains and using the sort of the vastness and richness of the internet and resources that we have. And it really talks about standards of excellence. And so that all combined means that we now have a model that can help us get to personalized learning that actually begins to describe how you can leverage the technology in order to get there and use those resources. So I know that we want to leave some time for discussion, and I know that I spoke very quickly. And for those of you who have joined us, I'm gonna pause now, and I'm gonna open up the conversation to some questions. And what I'm really most interested in, of course, is how does this connect to what you're doing now in your own system, and some experiences or some challenges, or are you listening to this and going, wow, that I don't even understand. What? Huh? Because those are all great things, or maybe you're already doing some of these things, and that's even better. So I will stop.
So this is a big lift that Chris just went through. There's a lot of data in here. I'm going to go back to sharing the screen. I just want to go back. I think one of the most influential parts is the part he shared about the structure. So educators that are on the line, what are your comments about this huge map of all the things that you're dealing with? I know Heather said earlier she has 11 people that are just doing data entry on all the different state level systems in California. I can only imagine then what's happening additionally for all of these disparate subsystems that are in play. You know, the little applets that do some widgety thing, and you know, communications apps or this or that or the other thing. Single sign-on identity management does handle a lot of you know, the getting in and that kind of stuff. And but the integration of the data behind that, I know Gavin was saying that the standards don't exist. I mean, there's no way to pull data out of some of those things and triangulate it all into one place. So there's a lot of work behind what we've just done with all of the EduJedi in the last year for what Chris was going over.
So the if I could jump in while we're waiting, one of the things that I keep coming back to in all of this is that you can't do it alone, and for systems to take a look at this structure or architecture for personalized learning and go, oh my gosh, there's no way my system's ready to do that. Well, maybe it isn't, but there are people out there that can help, and Learning Counsel is one of those organizations. But guess what? We know most of the other people that can help as well. And so, I think let's be vulnerable and let's say we got to have a partner in this, or a number of partners, because there's no way we can lift this by ourselves. I think that's an important step to take.
Yeah, it's a lot. This is a lot. So Jose Garcia has his hand up. I don't know if he wants to.
Yeah, yes, I do. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, fantastic. I was like, I wonder if this button's working. Yeah, so in looking at all of this kind of from a holistic point of view, I want to kind of go back to the discussion about standards. We have a lot of organizations looking to impose or create or develop some sort of standardized framework for digital learning, and obviously do it on a student outcomes based approach. How can we really express there are standards when we're all trying to kind of create as we go along in this COVID-19 environment? So, I mean, as an educator, I taught everything from K through 12, and I'm not in a teaching position now, but I can't imagine what our educators are going through if somebody comes in and says, here are the learning standards that we have to have you, succeed at, and hopefully you can make it work with the tools that you're given, right? So how do we feel as a team here about standards in general, and the direction that an educator, say a teacher, might use them to guide in the teaching process?
So can I hop in, Jose? I love that you said use toward the end, because oftentimes standards are seen as punitive, and they're not, right? They're designed because these are targets. These are targets for behavior and for performance, and these are things that, as you said later in the question, how do we use these to help ourselves get better and be more effective? And I think that it's a mindset. There's a thin gray line between using standards for learning and using standards or growth and development, and using standards as sort of a whip or sort of a gotcha. And unfortunately, I feel like we've spent many years with standards being the latter, being sort of a punitive measure, and you're being measured against something that maybe it wasn't even in your original design. And if we do that, and we've seen this, right? We've experienced this, and there was backlash against Common Core. Common Core is not evil, right? You couldn't look at any of those learning targets and say, nope, I don't think my kid should do any of those things. That's not what I want the learners to do. Of course not. It's just how we've chosen to interpret and apply that I think has caused standards to be a bad name, a bad word. And so, I think these are a set of standards that can help you to understand the scope of your work, and then help you to be most effective in it. And that's where I see this sort of connecting for me.
Yeah, and I would also comment that there's a lot of different angles to what standards are. Like, Chris, you just talked about, Common Core, and there's CASE standards in Georgia, and Texas has their own, TEKS standards. The different those are academic. I like to call them little bits of code about what you're supposed to stack the code together to get the student to their outcomes, like you were saying, Jose. And then there's these sorts of standards from the Learning Council, which can be adopted by any other organization. Their responsibilities. That's a different thing than things to know only. There are things you should be responsible for. And then there's the ISTE standards, which are more things to know and teach about digital citizenship and stuff like that. They're sort of a baseline. And they're also, about stuff you should be teaching. So you have also technical standards like the IMS Global Integration Standards and how you would build digital software. So there's these different universes of all these different standards. And yeah, it's kind of messy. We're living in a very messy time. I think what we're addressing here is that the transition to who you are as an operation and how you're being and thinking needed some guidance about your responsibilities now that you're something else than you were before. And that's a little bit different than things to teach.
I agree, Lonnie. And I remember a conversation that I had last week with a colleague of mine. He's on the technology side, and I asked him about, we were having the same conversation about the system, and he was lamenting that there was a sea of resources out there, and sort of it followed our conversation today to a T, which was fantastic. And I just asked, I said, so how many of your building administrators understand the legal aspects of the resources that they're approving in their building? He said, well, none of them. Do they know what hostile characteristics are? No, they don't. And so I feel like this is a great step forward in terms of describing your function and your responsibility, and it's like a guide. Like, could I have had this when I first started out as an administrator in a building, or a teacher even, just to say, okay, what are the things I need to be cognizant of? Yeah, I've got the teaching and learning stuff, but what's the other stuff that I need to know? Because just tell me. And right, we hear that in schools all the time. Just tell me what I need to know, and then help me learn it. And that's what this is. This helps.
Yeah. So Jose, I don't know what organization you're with, but what is your thoughts? Because you just mentioned, there's a lot out there. What are you thinking?
No, absolutely. So I'm actually with CUE, Computer Using Educators.
Oh, cool.
We're a nonprofit who helps, bring technology into the classroom, and we're often looking at exactly what you're describing here, which is the behaviors to, promote as these best practices to be able to help educators kind of almost adapt to what their individual needs are, right? But at times you run into, when you partner with, other organizations, you also run into, as we get into that conversation of outcomes, like, how is this? So for example, a hot topic right now is social and emotional learning and well-being, right?
Yeah.
So how is this assisting it's a social and emotional education that supports students and staff? Say that's a big highlight that's going on right now. So as we're looking into applying these, standards-based practices, is you get asked these questions, right? And so at times you almost want to say, well, the educator can then adapt these practices to be able to bring forth and enhance the student learning through social and emotional perspective. But, I guess what I'm trying to achieve here is somebody wants a defined answer to something we really don't have, and we're creating as we go along, if I'm making sense.
Yeah, I think that's what you're really dealing with. And, it would be great if CUE took these standards from us and did your own sort of application of them. These are all, everything we're showing you in the EduJedi dictionary, the EduJedi worked on, and we consider them a draft. And we're looking for organizations and school districts and more people in the EduJedi to be in the meetings that are being held on each part of it throughout this year, and take it over, edit, add things to it, subtract from it, codify it. So if you'll notice, most of what's going on with standards are things you're supposed to know, like you were just saying, like social emotionally, right? Mm-hmm. But you'll see in this one, like, this is the learner level on these standards. The first thing is take responsibility for being the correct level. Like, do we tell kids this? No. So yesterday when we were on with San Juan Unified, we talked a lot about their students. They even showed a video, the sweet kids. They're like, well, I miss everyone, things like that. And one of the things they really emphasized was that this is the first time suddenly students had to be in charge of their own time management, getting themselves into the right things. When you were physically attending in school, totally different world, right? Somebody was telling you, go open to chapter blah, blah, and do this. And it was all like organized. Now it's like, you got to be responsible for yourself. We're in a different world. And this is a huge leap for a lot of kids. So these standards developed by the EduJedi are things having to do with, now you're an independent, partly learner, and you have to put your hat on and you have to take responsibility for doing the things you're supposed to be doing. So it's not like stuff to learn, it's responsibilities. And I think that's dead center kind of your mission if you're CUE, because you got the same people that are with you guys as a lot of these EduJedi. So it's something that you might want to look at. I think you're also right in that it's a confusing world right now, but it's also fun. It's also like, wow, it's like so much new stuff to get into, and it's nothing boring at all about what's going on.
Absolutely. No, I think COVID has given us all an opportunity to grow and to learn. And that's actually why I was asking for the copy of the EduJedi dictionary. So I'll definitely look into this, and I'll email the team at Learning Counsel if I have any more questions.
Yeah.
Awesome, do that. Lonnie,
Yeah,
we had another comment from online from Ann Cruz, which brought up an interesting point, a social emotional side of the job of the administrator as an additional layer. And if I could just respond to that very quickly, that is part of the job, right? So your question is there some kind of training for admin to be able to influence hearts and minds and increase participation? That's your job. As an administrator, that's the job. And it's not easy. And sometimes you learn, sometimes it's trial by fire. And I think what we're talking about here in terms of the behavior standards, this is in addition to that, you need to be good at that, but you also need to understand that on the side of that main component of your job is this other understanding. And I think that causing it to be behavior helps to sort of put it into perspective, because it is how to operate. And while you are winning hearts and minds, because that's your job as the administrator, you've got to be cognizant of this other stuff in the backside, because that's what's going to help your system move forward, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I think we're coming up here to the top of the hour. We're going to have another guest. I'm going to go back to our other screen, calling for last comments from everyone on the line right now. Okay, going once, going twice. Thank you guys for commenting and getting involved a little bit in our conversation today.